My beloved child, before you let your heart believe the worst, listen carefully, because the reason your special person has been avoiding you may be completely different from what you imagined. There is something about August 13th that has been sitting quietly in the background of their life, and the closer that date gets, the harder it has become for them to face what they truly feel. You may have noticed the distance. Maybe their replies became shorter. Maybe they stopped reaching out the way they once did. Maybe they suddenly became difficult to understand, as if they were standing right in front of you emotionally one moment and disappearing the next. And now you are hearing something that could change the entire meaning of their silence. They are supposedly getting married on August 13th. But here is where the story takes a turn, because the person they are expected to marry is not necessarily the person their heart has been choosing. There is a difference between making a decision and being at peace with that decision. Your special person may have convinced themselves that they have to move forward, while a completely different truth keeps returning whenever they are alone. And that truth has your presence written all over it. The strange part is that their avoidance may not be because they stopped caring. It may be because seeing you makes the decision they are trying to make much harder. Every conversation with you could reopen something they have spent months trying to close. Every memory could remind them of the version of themselves they were when they were around you. And somewhere deep inside, they may be realizing that walking toward August 13th does not automatically mean their heart has walked away from you. But there is one detail you need to understand before this story goes any further. Your special person may have been trying to create emotional distance because they know that if they come close to you again, they will have questions they cannot easily answer. Why did they let you go? Why did they stay silent? Why did they allow another path to become so serious? Why did they pretend everything was fine when something inside them was still unsettled? These questions are becoming louder because August 13th is no longer some distant possibility. It is approaching, and with every passing day, the reality of that date may be forcing them to examine everything they have avoided. Imagine standing at the edge of a life you have already told everyone you want, only to suddenly remember the person you never completely stopped thinking about. That is the emotional conflict at the center of this story. And perhaps that is why their behavior toward you has felt so strange. They may not know how to explain why they still remember little things about you. They may not understand why your name can change their entire mood. They may have tried to convince themselves that memories are just memories, that history belongs in the past, that moving forward means never looking back. But sometimes the heart does not follow the schedule the mind creates. And this is where the revelation becomes even more intense. The closer they get to the wedding date, the more they may realize that avoiding you has not erased what they feel. It has only made them think about it in silence. Then something happens that changes the emotional weight of everything. Your special person begins remembering moments that seemed insignificant at the time. A conversation they once dismissed suddenly feels important. A look you gave them returns unexpectedly. A sentence you said months or years ago suddenly sounds different in their mind. They start wondering whether you understood them more deeply than they allowed themselves to admit. And while everyone around them may be focused on August 13th, preparations, plans, expectations, and the future they are supposed to step into, their mind keeps traveling backward toward the one connection they never fully explained. This is why you should not automatically interpret their silence as rejection. Silence can sometimes come from confusion, guilt, hesitation, or an attempt to control emotions that feel inconvenient. Your special person may be avoiding you because they know that one honest conversation could expose everything they have been hiding from themselves. They may fear that if they hear your voice, they will become uncertain. If they see you, they may remember exactly why you mattered. And if you ask them what they truly want, they may not have an answer that fits the life they have already arranged. That is the part nobody sees. People can prepare a ceremony, choose dates, make plans, and smile for photographs while privately wrestling with a completely different emotional reality. And perhaps August 13th is becoming a deadline not just for a wedding, but for a decision they have postponed for far too long. Yet there is still one piece of this story you have not heard, and it is the piece that may explain why their distance became so sudden. Because somewhere between their silence and the approaching date, they may have received a reminder of you that they were not prepared for. It could have been a familiar place, an old message, a photograph, a song, a mutual connection, or simply one quiet night when everything became still enough for the truth to rise. Suddenly, the person they had been trying not to think about became impossible to ignore. And that is where you enter the final moments of this part, because the question is no longer simply, why are they avoiding you? The bigger question is, what are they afraid will happen if they stop avoiding you? If their heart is truly settled somewhere else, your presence should not shake them this deeply. But if there is unfinished emotion, if there are words they never said, if there is regret hiding underneath their silence, then every day leading toward August 13th becomes heavier. They may be realizing that a wedding date can be placed on a calendar, but genuine certainty cannot be forced onto a heart. And the most surprising part is that you may not even know how close you are to discovering what they have been keeping hidden. There is a reason they pulled away. There is a reason they became quieter. There is a reason your connection still occupies a space in their thoughts despite everything that appears to be happening around them. And before this story reaches August 13th, something is going to have to be confronted, because the person they have been trying hardest to avoid may be the very person who forces them to finally face the truth about what they really want. What happened next was not something your special person had planned, because the closer August 13th came, the more difficult it became for them to keep pretending that everything inside them was settled. From the outside, they could continue acting normal, answering questions, making plans, and allowing people to believe that their future was already decided. But privately, something had shifted. They were no longer simply avoiding you. They were avoiding the questions your existence awakened inside them. And one question kept returning with uncomfortable persistence: why am I still thinking about someone I supposedly left behind? That question became especially powerful during quiet moments, when there was nobody around to influence what they were supposed to feel. Your special person may have discovered that avoiding your messages did not erase your memory. Staying away from familiar places did not erase the connection. Keeping conversations short did not erase the emotions attached to everything you once shared. In fact, distance may have made those memories louder. They may have started remembering the details they once overlooked, the way you understood their silence, the way you noticed changes in their mood, the way conversations with you felt effortless even when neither of you knew what to say. And now, with August 13th approaching, those details may feel less like memories and more like unfinished questions. This is why their behavior may seem contradictory. They could appear completely detached one day and then become unusually thoughtful the next. They could avoid speaking to you while secretly wondering whether you still think about them. They could act certain around others while privately questioning whether they are walking toward the right future. The mystery is not that they forgot you. The mystery is why they have been working so hard to convince themselves that they did. And then comes the moment your special person may never have expected. Someone says something that unexpectedly brings you into the conversation. Perhaps your name is mentioned casually, perhaps an old memory is brought up, or perhaps somebody asks a simple question about the past. But instead of responding naturally, they become quiet. That silence reveals more than a long explanation ever could. Because suddenly they are confronted with the one subject they have been carefully keeping away from their upcoming plans. You. They may realize that everyone assumes they have moved forward, while nobody knows how complicated their emotions have remained. And this is where the story becomes deeply personal. They may not be avoiding you because they have nothing to say. They may be avoiding you because there is too much they could say. They may want to explain why they disappeared. They may want to tell you what happened behind the scenes. They may want to admit that certain decisions were made while their emotions were still unresolved. But saying those things would force them to acknowledge a truth they have been postponing. Perhaps they know that if they finally speak honestly with you, they cannot keep living inside the convenient version of the story. They would have to answer for the distance. They would have to explain the mixed signals. They would have to confront why August 13th feels heavier than it should. And perhaps most importantly, they would have to discover whether what they feel for you is merely nostalgia, or whether it is something they never truly allowed themselves to understand. That uncertainty may be exactly why they keep pulling away whenever they feel themselves getting too close. Now pay attention to the detail that changes everything. Your special person may have started comparing the life they are preparing for with the life they once imagined with you. Not because every memory means they should return to the past, but because major decisions have a way of exposing what people genuinely value. Suddenly, things they once considered small become meaningful. They remember how safe it felt to be understood without having to explain every emotion. They remember moments when being with you felt natural rather than carefully constructed. They remember the person they were when they did not have to perform certainty for anyone. And that comparison may be making them uncomfortable. Because if they were truly untouched by the past, why would these memories be resurfacing now? Why would your absence feel noticeable during moments that are supposed to be joyful? Why would the approaching date make them think about a person they have deliberately avoided? These are not questions you can answer for them. They have to answer them themselves. And perhaps that is the real reason they have stayed away from you. They may know that you deserve honesty, but they may not yet know how to give it without changing the direction of everything around them. So they remain silent. They watch from a distance. They wonder whether you have moved on. They wonder whether you would even listen if they finally spoke. And somewhere beneath all of that is one fear, not fear of you, but fear of discovering that their carefully arranged future does not match the truth they feel inside. Here is the part you were never supposed to see coming. The person your special person is preparing to marry may not even realize how much emotional history still exists between you and them. They may know the basic story, but they may not know the private details, the memories, the unfinished conversations, and the emotions your special person has never openly described. That means the silence around you could be hiding an entire emotional chapter that nobody else has read. And as August 13th approaches, the pressure to finally close that chapter may become stronger than the desire to keep avoiding it. Your special person may soon have to look at everything honestly and ask themselves whether they are moving forward because their heart is ready, or because they are afraid to stop and reconsider. And that distinction matters more than the date itself. Because a calendar can tell you when something is supposed to happen, but it cannot tell you what someone truly feels. The most powerful revelation may not be whether a wedding happens exactly as planned. The real revelation is why your special person has been acting as though they have already made peace with a decision that still seems to bring your memory back into their thoughts. And if you think their silence means the story is finished, stay with this, because the next piece reveals what may have happened immediately before they began avoiding you, and why that single moment could explain everything about the distance you have been feeling. The moment everything started changing was quieter than you might imagine, because your special person did not suddenly wake up and decide to avoid you. Something happened that made them realize they were getting emotionally closer to you again, and that realization unsettled them. They may have noticed themselves checking for your presence, wondering whether you had posted something, remembering an old conversation without any obvious reason, or replaying a moment between you that they thought they had already forgotten. It was not one dramatic event that pulled you back into their thoughts. It was the accumulation of tiny reminders, each one becoming harder to dismiss. And then came the realization they did not want to admit. August 13th was approaching, and instead of feeling completely certain about the future waiting for them, they were thinking about you. That is when the distance may have become deliberate. They stopped themselves from reaching out because they knew exactly what could happen if they did. One innocent conversation could turn into an emotional confession. One familiar laugh could bring back everything they had tried to place behind them. One question from you, "Why have you been avoiding me?" could force them to explain something they were not ready to explain. So they chose silence because silence gave them control. At least, that is what they told themselves. But silence has a strange way of doing the opposite. When someone cannot speak about what they feel, the mind keeps returning to it. And your special person may have found themselves thinking about you at the most inconvenient moments, especially when everyone around them was talking about their upcoming marriage. The date that was supposed to represent certainty may have started representing a question instead. And that question was not about whether they remembered you. They did. It was about why they still cared. Then came the memory that may have affected them more deeply than anything else. It was probably not the biggest moment you shared. It may have been something ordinary that you barely remember. A simple conversation, a quiet look, a moment when you were there for them without asking for anything in return. Those small moments can become incredibly powerful when someone is facing a major life decision. Your special person may have remembered how naturally you understood what they could not explain. They may have remembered how you made them feel seen without demanding that they perform a certain version of themselves. And suddenly, the contrast became impossible to ignore. They started wondering whether they had confused comfort with certainty, expectation with love, or timing with destiny. They may have asked themselves whether they were moving toward this marriage because it genuinely reflected what they wanted or because everything had already progressed too far to question. That internal conversation could explain why they became distant from you. They may have thought that if they removed the reminder, they could remove the question. If they stopped hearing from you, perhaps their thoughts would settle. If they avoided your eyes, perhaps their heart would stop searching for answers. But that strategy may have failed completely. Because the less they spoke to you, the more they began speaking to you inside their own mind. They may have imagined conversations that never happened. They may have pictured what you would say if they finally told you the truth. They may have wondered whether you would be angry, whether you would forgive them, or whether you had already emotionally moved beyond the place where they left you. And one thought may have hit them harder than all the others: what if I waited too long? Now the story becomes even more complicated because your special person may not be the only one noticing their change. Someone close to them could have sensed that their excitement was not matching the expectations surrounding the upcoming wedding. Perhaps they became quieter when August 13th was mentioned. Perhaps they changed the subject when conversations became too personal. Perhaps they seemed distracted during moments when everyone expected them to be completely present. These details can be easy to hide once or twice, but repeated hesitation eventually becomes noticeable. And that may be why your special person became even more careful around you. They could be trying to protect the appearance of certainty while privately wrestling with something they have not resolved. Imagine carrying a secret question while everyone keeps congratulating you on an answer you are no longer sure about. That is the emotional pressure they may be experiencing. And the strange part is that you may have become the symbol of that unresolved question without even doing anything. You did not have to chase them. You did not have to demand an explanation. Your existence alone may remind them of a path they once considered, a connection they never fully understood, and a version of themselves they have not completely forgotten. That is why their avoidance may feel so intense. They are not simply avoiding a person, they are avoiding the emotional mirror that person represents. Every time they come close to you, they are forced to see what they have been trying not to see in themselves. But there is one final detail that changes the meaning of their silence completely. Your special person may have already imagined what would happen if they contacted you before August 13th. They may have wondered whether you would answer immediately or leave them waiting. They may have imagined saying, "I need to tell you something," and then struggled to figure out what would come next. They may have rehearsed an explanation in their head, only to abandon it because every possible opening eventually leads to the same difficult truth: they cannot talk about their future without acknowledging their past with you. And perhaps that is why they have remained silent until now. Not because there is nothing left between you, but because there is something unfinished that they do not know how to approach. The date is getting closer. The emotional pressure is increasing. The questions they buried are resurfacing. And somewhere in all of this, your special person may be realizing that the biggest decision is not simply whether they walk toward August 13th. It is whether they are willing to stop pretending that their heart has no questions left. Because the next revelation is where the story takes its sharpest T.